Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear students. Welcome again with Jan Eyre. Last time we had from chapter 1 to chapter 5, and this time, inshallah, we will have from chapter 6 to chapter 10. I'll be with you, inshallah, Mr. Waleed Abdul Majid. In the last chapter we had last time, it was Jan Eyre who left Lowood Institution and she wanted to be a teacher on her own عشان تبقى لوحدها. Okay, Jan Eyre started a new journey in her life, okay, searching for her career عشان كانت متضايقة جدا من العيشة اللي كانت عايشاها. Okay, she advertised for herself to work as a governess. A governess is someone who is employed by the rich people to teach their little girls at home. She went there. A house for a rich man is called Mr. Rochester. It's called Mr. Rochester. Mr. Rochester owns a house called Thornfield. First, when Jan Eyre went to visit this house for the first time, she met a lady called Mrs. Fairfax. Mrs. Fairfax. Mrs. Fairfax was the housekeeper of the house, and she was a plain lady. At the beginning, Jan Eyre thought that she was the owner of Thornfield, but when she knew that she was only the housekeeper, she felt equality with her. ودي بنقول عليها social class. إنها حست إنها هما الاثنين, both of them get their salaries from the same person. Jan Eyre started working there, but Mr. Rochester was a mysterious character. Why? Because Mr. Rochester had sudden visits. Nobody knows when he comes, nobody knows when he leaves. The girl was a French girl, I mean the student, Adele, Vernice Adele. Jan Eyre played a good teacher with her. وعملت لها plan, she set a plan for her, and this girl started to make progress in the educational process. بدأت تبقى حد كويس في العملية التعليمية. Jan Eyre, while walking with Mrs. Fairfax, they went upstairs to the third floor because this house contains first, second, and third floor. When they were walking there, Jan Eyre started to hear a strange sound, strange voice, laugh. Yes, ضحكة غريبة. She asked Mrs. Fairfax about it, but she had unclear answer. ما جاوبتهاش إجابة صريحة. But it was very, very fearful. بتخوف قوي. For this situation, we're going to talk about Gothic element. Do you remember Gothic when I told you that Gothic means something that you fear, something that needs suspense, okay? So the first Gothic element for Jan Eyre at Thornfield is the strange laugh, okay? Or it was nearly a cry, okay? But we don't know for whom. Jan Eyre went to send some letters, and it was her first time to meet Mr. Rochester, but she didn't meet him at the house. She met him near the house, okay? And when she met him, she was very afraid of the horse because the horse was coming fast. Suddenly, Mr. Rochester fell off the horse, okay? And she helped him to get onto the horse again, and they had a small talk, but he didn't tell her that he was the owner of Thornfield. When she went back home, Mrs. Fairfax told her that Mr. Rochester had an accident and he fell off the horse. Then she realized that the person she had met earlier was Mr. Rochester. Okay, so she was afraid when she first met Mr. Rochester. Okay, Miss Jane Eyre met Mr. Rochester at the house, and they had a talk, and they started, both of them, to feel closer to each other. بس حصل موقف كده لذيذ. Jane Eyre was in her room, and suddenly she felt someone was walking in front of her room in the corridor. She felt that someone was trying to open the door. بدأت تخاف. Then she started to open the door, and suddenly she could see some smoke coming out from Mr. Rochester's room. Oh, it was a strange thing. She ran quickly to Mr. Rochester's room, and she opened. When she opened it, she found that the whole the whole room was on fire. She ran to Mr. Rochester, and she used some water was next to his bedroom. Sorry, his bed, and she started to put out. But she couldn't wake him at first. He came out. As he got up, and he helped himself, and she saved his life. حصل دوشة كتير بس الحمد لله قدرت تنقذه. But here, he asked her to stay as she was standing, and he went upstairs to the third floor. For what reason? We don't know. When he came back from the third floor, he asked her, "Did you see anything?" She said, "No." "Have you heard anything?" She said, "No." Then they started to have the first step of admiration. Mr. Rochester started to feel something towards Jane Eyre. He thanked her for saving his life. Okay, and from this step, the fire was destructive, but in this case, it was constructive because it was the main reason for Mr. Rochester and Jane Eyre to start to fall in love with each other. Okay, so for the Gothic element in this part, we're going to have that when she first met Mr. Rochester, she was afraid at the beginning. When she heard the loud cry, okay, she didn't know the source of this, okay. Then let's move to the fire. When Jane Eyre entered the hall, she sees a candle burning just outside her room, and she sees smoke coming from Mr. Rochester's room. When she enters his room, she sees him bed on fire and tries to wake him. She throws the water from the bowl onto the bed and runs to her room to get hers, to get some more water. Mr. Rochester tells Jane not to move or to call anyone. For what reason, Why? We don't know. And goes to the staircase up, the third story, or the third floor, I mean. Story, طابق يعني. When he returns, he asks Jane what she saw and heard. She and implied that it was Grace Poole. Main Grace Poole, it was a nurse who set fire to his bed. The nurse, بس النيرس المين مش عارفين لسه. When Jane goes to go back to bed, Mr. Rochester seems to want to have more interaction with her, and he holds her hands and tells her that he knew she would do him good in some way. May تكون useful for him. This is also another example of the positive nature of fire. Although the fire is potentially destructive, the incident brings Mr. Rochester and Jane much closer together. وكانت النار هنا هي السبب ان هم يقربوا من بعض جدا. طب حصل ايه كمان بعدها؟ Mr. Rochester disappeared after this, and when he came back, there was some guests. Okay, from the guests there was a lady. It's called Miss Ingram. Miss Ingram was a rich lady, okay, and very beautiful. and it is said that she's going to marry Mr. Rochester. When Jane Eyre heard about this, she felt something in her heart, okay? As a girl, because she started to feel something towards Mr. Rochester. When Mr. Rochester came, he came incognito, disguised, because he came back as a fortune teller. الناس اللي هم بيشوفوا البخت. And he made a test for Miss Ingram. He asked her if she wanted to marry the owner of the house. هو عمل نفسه يا جماعة دلوقتي إن هو الفورتune teller, and he covered his face and he changed his voice. Miss Ingram went back from the fortune teller annoyed ورجعت متضايقة. Mr. Rochester insisted to meet Jane Eyre, بس هو متخفي. He met her and they had a talk, and from this talk she could know that he was Mr. Rochester. قالت له إيه, this voice is not for a woman. And when he used his hand in speaking, قالت له الإيد دي أنا شفتها قبل كده. Okay, and they had a lovely talk after that. Mr. Rochester was trying to teasing her. بيحاول يغيظها شوية. He was trying to make her jealous of Miss Ingram. Okay, well, Mr. Rochester was coming closer to Jane Eyre. حصل موقف بقى غريب. Mr. Rochester tested Miss Ingram, and he told her that he lost most of his fortune, most of his money, and he would be very poor. After this test, Miss Ingram didn't visit him. Then, day by day, he started to be closer to Jane Eyre, and Jane Eyre started to be closer to him. Jane Eyre received a letter from Mrs. Reed asking her to come. At the beginning, Mr. Rochester didn't want Jane Eyre to leave, and he had a promise from her to come back again, and he gave her her money because she asked it for. Then she traveled. When she traveled, she stayed with Mrs. Reed. Mrs. Reed بعتت لها ايه لسبب يا جماعة. ايه هو؟ Mrs. Reed قالت لها Mrs. Reed ما بتحبهاش جدا. قالت لها ايه that she had an uncle. He was a very rich man, and he asked about her because her uncle wanted Jane Eyre to live with him because he was rich. تخيلين بقى العيشة بتاعت جين إير هتختلف تماما. ولكن Mrs. Reed, hard-hearted, severe, she was very cruel. She told her uncle that Jane Eyre died in the school. طبعا جين إير اتضايقت أكتر. لكن Mrs. Reed was about to die and she was very sick. And before she died, Mrs. Jane Eyre forgave her وسامحتها على اللي هي عملته. When she came back home, Jane Eyre went to Mr. Rochester, and Mr. Rochester asked Jane Eyre to marry her. She accepted, okay, and they started to prepare for the wedding. But something strange happened. إيه اللي حصل؟ We're going to read all these themes, by the way, right now, and the characters as well, in detail, inshallah. What happened? Mr. Rochester was in the church, and it was the wedding day. But someone appeared. Someone appeared when Mr. Rochester was about to marry. Someone visited Mr. Rochester at the Thornfield. And that night, أو at a night, الراجل دوت اللي ظهر في الكنيسة كان في ليلة من الليالي قاعد مع مستر روتشستر وكان بايت معاه. And suddenly they had heard a loud cry. وطبعا دي كانت حاجة تخوف جدا. They ran quickly to the room of this man. Okay, and they found him injured. They found him injured, but with no reason. They didn't know who did it. وكان الخطر ده جاي برضه في from the third floor. Mr. Rochester used Jane Eyre as a nurse to look after this man. مين هو الراجل ده؟ ومين اللي عوره؟ برضه في مشكلة من الثيرد فلور، محدش برضه عارف. This man appeared when Mr. Rochester was about to marry Jane Eyre. وراح قايل ايه؟ This marriage cannot be completed because Mr. Rochester is married. فهم عندهم ما ينفعش واحد يتجوز اتنين. فجان اير looked at him and asked him, is this true؟ قال لهم I'm married but not married. ليه؟ هو متجوز واحدة اسمها بيرثا ميسون، واللي كان بيتكلم the man who was talking was her brother. Because Bertha Mason was a mad woman, and Mr. Rochester didn't discover this before marriage. After marriage, he found out that the lady he had married to was insane. كانت مجنونة يا جماعة. After that, he took old people to the third floor. He wanted them to see the lady he had married to. And when they went to the upstairs, Mr. Rochester gave them the opportunity to see his wife. Officially, he had a wife, but naturally, he doesn't have a wife because she was a mad lady. She was very pretty, but insane. Jane Eyre lost all her dreams because she was about to be Mrs. Rochester, a rich man, but she lost it. وكل أحلامها ضاعت. Now we're going to talk about social class or social position. Jane cared about social position with Mrs. Fairfax, judging from the plainness, اللي هي حاجة بسيطة يعني, the servant, the carriage. Jane believed that Mrs. Fairfax is not a very fashionable person. When also Jane knew that Mrs. Fairfax was only a housekeeper, she felt that Mrs. Fairfax was not a great, and the equality between them was real. Also, Blanche ديت يا جماعة, Blanche Ingram insulted Jane, and during chapter we could notice that all the conversation was focused on their intellectual equality بين العقلية بينهم هما الاثنين. Let's now deal with the characters. Jane Eyre was the main character. Was there an Eyre a good teacher to Adele? مين أديل؟ البنت اللي كانت بتذاكر لها في بيت ثورنفيلد. طب بنت مين ديت؟ محدش عارف لسه. Jane set a successful plan to teach Adele. They read books together about biography, travel, poetry, literature. Result of Jane's plan, Adele forgot her little freaks, became obedient and teachable. Jane Eyre having great power of forgiveness. طبعا. Mrs. Reed sent a message to Jane Eyre asking to see her. Mrs. Reed said that she wanted to say the truth to Jane Eyre before she might die, اللي هي بتاعت عمها. Mrs. Reed told Jane about her rich relative, and because she disliked Jane, she told him that Jane Eyre died due to fever. ماتت من الفيفر, الحمى. Jane forgave Mrs. Reed even after she had spoiled her life. يعني هي كده دمرت حياتها. Was Jane Eyre wise? Yes. Thinking of successful plan to teach Adele that made her very wise. And she also has dignity. When Mr. Rochester said that she was going to marry, لما كان بيضحك عليها وبيغيظها, قال لها I'm going to marry Blanche Ingram. She asked him, قالت له allow me to leave. خليني أمشي. When she became angry, okay, when she knew the difference in rank between them. And that self-respect, طبعا. Once there was a party at Mr. Rochester's house اللي هو Thornfield. When she entered before the guests, instead of putting herself in the position of critics, دخلت قعدت لوحدها من غير ما حد يقول لها تقعدي فين. She well educated طبعا. She's speaking French مع أديل. أديل دي تتكلم فرنش وهي اتكلمت معاها. Let's know who is Miss Ingram. Miss Ingram was the guest of Mr. Rochester, and she wanted to marry him only for his money. Represent the upper class because she spoke about people who were less in rank. دايما بتتكلم عن الناس اللي أقل منها in insulting way. Greedy طبعا. She only cares about money. And it was clear when Mr. Rochester tested her after he had known he was not rich. She was shocked, surprised. She picked the book and didn't turn a page. مسكت الكتاب كده وتنحت يعني. She was severe, unkind, yes. She likes insulting people. And she told Adele, "You're a little monkey," because she thought that Mr. Rochester gives her a lot of money, in education, I mean. And she spoke badly about governesses. And when somebody told her that Jane might listen, she didn't care. بتتكلم على governesses والteachers وحش وما هماش ان هم واقفين جنبهم. Interfering, yes. حشرية شوية يا جماعة. Because she inquired about Jane Eyre. She asked Mr. Rochester with this girl and what she was doing here. Okay? And she asked Mr. Rochester to send Adele to school. It must be cheaper for him. She was well educated because she was singing well and playing music. And she was ungrateful because she spoke badly about governesses. Governesses brought her up and they taught her. Let's go to Mr. Rochester. Mr. Rochester was a man of promise because he promised Adele to bring her some present, and he did it. And he asked, when he was asked from Adele's mother to take care of her, he did it. وخلى باله منها. طيب. Mr. Rochester having power of understanding people. Yes. He was not deceived by Miss Ingram. كان فاهمها كويس قوي that she wanted to marry him because of his money. And he had a great look of Jane Eyre. However, she was less in rank, كانت أقل منه في المستوى. But she was open-minded and knowledgeable. طب نقدر نقول عليه a faithful husband أو a man of secret جدا. Mr. Rochester married Bertha. He didn't know that she was mad, as it was kept a secret by her family. When he knew, he's still taking care of her. وبرضه خلى باله منها وجاب لها nurse اللي هي Grace Poole. When he tries to save Bertha Mason, his wife, لا دي خليها بعدين يا جماعة. He was wise. Yes, he was wise, knowledgeable. When he spoke to Jane, he found that she was knowledgeable. He was responsible. Yes, a responsible man, because he looks after Adele. She was not his daughter, but he looks after her, and he looks after Bertha Mason, his wife. Was he a mysterious person? Yes, he was very mysterious, because he had sudden visits. As I told you at the beginning, rarely visit this place. بس أول ما بدأ يعرف جان إير ويحبها بدأ يزور المكان كتير. Now we had a Gothic element. Let's revise quickly. Gothic element. قلنا loud cry. قلنا الفاير before the fire إن جان إير كانت خايفة جدا. Mr. Rochester. بصوا supernatural دي يا جماعة. Mr. Rochester asked Jane Eyre to stay with him. بس هي رفضت. And she heard the voice of her mother saying, "Leave this place. Leave this place." فده بنقول عليه Gothic حاجة خرافية. Remember the fire? The fire is destructive, but in this incident وفي المشهد ده the author أو the writer قال أو بيعرفنا إن الفاير هنا constructive because it was the main reason for Jane Eyre to be closer to Mr. Rochester in feeling. Social position with Mrs. Fairfax, as I told you shortly. And the characters we had John Eyre, Miss Ingram, and the new character, Mr. Rochester. Inshallah, next time I will be with you with the last chapters of this novel. See you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.